U.S. Marshals arrested Trevon Wright, who was also 17 at the time. The family says Wright and Hood had been dating, but broke things off after Hood discovered Wright wasn't the father of her baby. In an arrest affidavit, Lester says Wright was at her home visiting Hood and the baby when a gunshot sounded from Hood's bedroom. Lester says the door was locked, so she went outside and climbed halfway through the window, finding Wright gone and her daughter unmoving.
I rolled her over.
January 7th, 2024. A Sunday morning just like any other, or so it seemed. In the quiet neighborhood of Southeast Oak Cliff, Dallas, the kind of peace that most of us take for granted was about to be shattered. Inside a small home on Grambling Drive, 17-year-old Ikea Imari Hood was supposed to be starting a new chapter in her life, as a mother to her newborn daughter. Ikea had a future ahead of her, full of promise, ambition, and dreams. She was known for her talent as a dancer, her vibrant personality, and her deep love for her family. But that morning, everything changed in an instant. Ikea was found lifeless in her bedroom. No signs of a struggle. No loud commotion. Just a room that, moments before, was filled with her energy, now silenced forever. The suspect? Her on-again, off-again boyfriend, 17-year-old Trevon Wright. A young man who, like Ikea, was full of potential. Yet, in a tragic twist, he would become the one accused of taking her life. But how did it come to this? How did a relationship, full of both tenderness and tension, come to an end so violently? What led up to this heartbreaking moment? And what secrets lay behind the locked door of Ikea's bedroom? In the days that followed, questions began to emerge. Was it something they argued about? Was it an unexpected burst of violence? Or was it the result of a deeper, darker issue that had been brewing for far too long? This case would reveal much more than a tragic murder. It would show how complicated and dangerous relationships can be when trust is broken, when anger festers, and when love becomes twisted. Welcome to City Crime Tales. We're diving deep into the events that led to the death of Ikea Hood, the tragic loss of a young woman with a future so full of possibility, and the heartbreaking ripple effect it left on her family, her friends, and her community. If you're new to this channel, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. You won't want to miss what comes next. We tell real stories, ones that matter. Stories like this one, where the truth could be just as chilling as the crime itself. Ikea Hood was more than just a teenager. She was a beacon of hope, a young woman whose infectious energy filled every room she entered. To those who knew her, she was a bright light, a source of joy and inspiration. Her friends called her the life of the party, always ready to make others laugh, but it wasn't just her smile that drew people in, it was her spirit. Growing up in the tight-knit community of Oak Cliff, Dallas, Ikea's early life was shaped by the love and support of her family. As the daughter of Tequoia Lester, she learned early on what it meant to care for those around her. Ikea wasn't just a big sister. She was a protector, a guide, a constant source of reassurance for her siblings. She was the one who made sure no one ever felt alone or forgotten. But what really set Ikea apart was her passion for dance. From a young age, she showed an undeniable talent. Her moves were more than just rhythmic gestures. They were an extension of her soul. Her body seemed to flow effortlessly to the beat, captivating anyone lucky enough to watch her perform. She joined the Lancaster High School Tigerette Drill Team, where she quickly became known for her graceful movements, her flawless technique, and her ability to make even the most difficult routines look effortless. Her coaches often spoke about her work ethic. Ikea wasn't just talented, she was dedicated. She spent hours practicing, refining her skills, and pushing herself to be better. Even when others were resting, Ikea was working. It wasn't enough for her to be good. She wanted to be great. And greatness was something she was well on her way to achieving. But for all her talents, Ikea was never one to seek the spotlight for herself. She loved being part of something bigger than herself. The drill team, her family, her community. She didn't just perform for the applause. She performed because it brought her joy, because it allowed her to express herself in ways words never could. The joy she felt when she danced was evident in the way she carried herself. At home, she was known for her playful side. Family gatherings were never dull when Ikea was around. She'd often organize impromptu talent shows in the living room, getting her younger siblings involved. Whether it was choreographing a silly dance routine or teaching them the latest moves from her team, Ikea brought people together with her vibrant energy. Her mother, Takoya, often spoke about the special bond she shared with Ikea. She was the glue that held our family together, Takoya said. Ikea remembered everyone's birthdays, made sure no one ever felt left out, and was always the first to offer a hug when someone was feeling down. She had an uncanny ability to balance being a confidant, a mentor, and a comedian all at once. For Ikea, family was everything. She made it her mission to lift others up, especially when they were struggling. And then, in December 2023, Ikea's life took a profound turn. She became a mother to a beautiful baby girl named Iceland. The birth of her daughter was a moment of overwhelming joy, but it also brought new challenges. Teenage motherhood isn't easy, and Ikea knew that all too well. Yet, instead of being intimidated by the challenges ahead, Ikea embraced her new role with a fierce determination. In the weeks that followed Iceland's birth, Ikea balanced her responsibilities as a new mother with her dreams of dancing. Her bedroom became a place where motherhood and artistry coexisted. A crib sat beside her dance trophies, baby clothes shared drawer space with her leotards and costumes. She would gently rock her daughter to sleep while watching dance routines, whispering to her newborn about the day they would dance together. Ikea's dreams had never been solely about herself. She envisioned a future where she could show her daughter what it meant to chase your dreams, no matter the obstacles. She imagined dancing on bigger stages, not just for herself, but for Iceland too. "Watch me show my daughter what's possible," she'd tell her friends, her voice full of excitement and resolve. "I'm going to dance on bigger stages now because she'll be watching." In fact, she wasn't just thinking about herself or her daughter. Ikea dreamed of opening her own dance studio one day, a place where young mothers could come and dance while bringing their children with them. Her mind raced with ideas about how she could merge her love for dance with her new role as a mother, about how she could inspire other young women to chase their passions, no matter where life led them. Ikea's ambitions weren't just about achieving success for herself. She was already thinking of ways to help others. This combination of determination, generosity, and love for her family made her stand out in a world where so many young women struggled to find their path. Ikea had found hers, and she was determined to walk it with grace, joy, and strength. Trevon Wright's story, much like Ikea's, began in the very same community, Oak Cliff, Dallas, a place where challenges were as common as the streets lined with small homes. But unlike Ikea, who had a family that pulled her close, Trevon's early years were filled with emotional distance and turmoil. Born into a world of uncertainty, he didn't have the luxury of a calm and stable environment. Trevon grew up in a household that struggled to provide the support and guidance that most young people take for granted. His parents had their own issues to deal with, and as the years went by, Trevon began to feel increasingly isolated. He didn't have the emotional connections that Ikea had with her family, those bonds that anchored her in times of need. Instead, he turned inward, growing quiet, reserved, and often angry at the world around him. From an early age, Trevon harbored a deep sense of wanting to belong. For him, the streets became a place of refuge, a space where he could find acceptance. He sought approval from people who didn't always have his best interests at heart. The thrill of being part of something, the rush of belonging to a group, gave him a false sense of worth. He found solace in this, even though the company he kept often led him down dangerous paths. School wasn't an easy place for Trevon either. He struggled academically, never quite fitting into the mold of what was expected from a young student. His grades were poor, and while others around him excelled, Trevon couldn't seem to find his footing. He felt alienated, caught in a cycle of wanting to prove himself but unsure of how to do it. Instead of focusing on his future, he became more entrenched in his present struggles, often seeking out distractions and negative outlets. It was during these formative years that Trevon's connection to the local gang started to take shape. The allure of street life was strong, promising him a place to belong, even if it meant walking away from his family and friends. With the gang, Trevon found a twisted form of loyalty, a place where he thought he mattered. He felt powerful in ways he had never experienced before. It was in this world that Trevon began to change, not only in the way he saw others but also in how he viewed himself. He became more hardened, more distant, and increasingly protective of the image he created for himself. As a teenager, Trevon's emotions became harder to control. His sense of anger grew, and so did his possessiveness in relationships. He began to view love as a way to keep people close, but in the wrong way. The jealousy and need for control that simmered beneath the surface of his relationships would soon come to light in the most tragic of ways. This is where his relationship with Ikea began to take root. She became a symbol to him, someone he could hold on to, someone who could give him the affection and attention he had always craved. What started as a bond built on shared interests and emotional connection soon began to shift. Trevon's insecurities took hold, and he became more possessive of Ikea, more controlling of her actions, her time, and her life. Ikea, with all her talent and light, didn't fully recognize the warning signs. She had her own world to navigate, and though she loved Trevon, she couldn't have known how deep the cracks ran in his sense of self. The jealousy and possessiveness that grew between them would set the stage for an emotional storm, one that neither of them could have anticipated. The anger that had been festering for years would now manifest in the relationship that meant the most to him, and the consequences would be devastating. But before this dark chapter in his life, Trevon was still a young man with so much potential. He could have gone down a different path, one that didn't end in violence, but his early life, shaped by isolation, the need to belong, and emotional instability, made it impossible for him to see the damage he was doing to both himself and the people around him. Ikea's relationship with Trevon Wright was anything but simple. On the surface, it seemed like a love story, two young people finding their way through the ups and downs of life, growing together in the process. But beneath the surface, things were far more complicated. Their relationship was described by those who knew them as on again, off again. At times, they appeared inseparable, bound by an undeniable chemistry that drew them together in powerful ways. But as quickly as they came together, they would drift apart, their emotional turmoil pulling them in different directions. There were moments of tenderness and connection, but there were also moments of tension. Moments where their bond was tested by the pressures of their individual lives and, more significantly, their unresolved conflicts. Family members later revealed that their relationship had been marked by volatility and emotional instability. Though the specifics remained unclear, there were signs of deep-rooted issues that neither Ikea nor Trevon could fully address. The passion they shared often turned into frustration, and the love they felt sometimes veered into unhealthy territory. Trevon's emotional struggles were a constant strain. His need for control, his possessiveness, and his insecurities all fed into the turbulent dynamic they shared. Ikea, for her part, loved Trevon but wasn't always able to see the depth of his emotional struggles. She believed in their connection, in the moments of peace they shared, and in the potential for a future together. But she didn't fully realize the emotional weight that Trevon was carrying, nor the damage that had been done by their past conflicts. In December 2023, Ikea gave birth to their daughter, Iselin. The news should have been a joyous occasion, a moment to celebrate the new life they had brought into the world. But for Trevon, things weren't as simple as they appeared. He believed for months that he was the father of Iselin. It was a role he had embraced with anticipation, envisioning himself as a father to a child he thought was his. He dreamed of being there for his daughter, of raising her alongside Ikea, of building a future together as a family. But in the weeks following the birth, the truth emerged. A truth that would shake the very foundation of their relationship. A paternity test, taken in the days after Iselin was born, revealed that Trevon was not the biological father. The truth was devastating. The image he had built of himself as a father was shattered, and with it, the fragile sense of control he had over his life and relationship. The news hit Trevon hard. For someone who had struggled with feelings of inadequacy and anger throughout his life, this revelation felt like a cruel betrayal. It wasn't just the truth that hurt, it was the sense of humiliation, of being deceived, and of losing the role he had mentally prepared for. The pain of being rejected, even in this deeply personal way, magnified all the emotional struggles that had been simmering beneath the surface for so long. Trevon's reaction to the news was one of devastation, but also of anger. His sense of identity had been upended, and in his mind, the person responsible for this betrayal was Ikea. The very woman he had loved, the woman who had given him hope for the future, was now at the center of a storm of emotions he couldn't control. As Ikea prepared to confront him with the truth, she could not have known the devastating impact it would have on him. Despite their differences, Ikea had always been willing to face difficult conversations with Trevon. She believed that they could work through their issues, that honesty and openness could mend the cracks in their relationship. But this time the conversation would not go as planned. She had planned to tell Trevon about the paternity test results that Sunday morning, January 7, 2024. She hoped for understanding, for clarity. But what she couldn't have anticipated was the emotional storm that would follow. Trevon, overwhelmed with a sense of loss, anger, and betrayal, couldn't see the situation for what it was. An unfortunate revelation, but one that could have been handled with maturity and compassion. Instead, the truth became a trigger for something far darker. And so, as Ikea tried to navigate the emotional minefield of their relationship, she found herself facing a moment she couldn't have prepared for. What was meant to be a conversation about their future, their shared responsibility as parents, quickly escalated into something far more dangerous. The emotional fallout from this revelation would set the stage for the tragic events that would unfold later that day. In the midst of their relationship's unraveling, Ikea couldn't have known that the man she once loved would ultimately become the source of the violence that would take her life. Trevon's anger, his sense of betrayal, and his inability to manage the emotions that had been building for years all converged in a moment of horrifying violence. It wasn't just about the paternity test, it was about control, about identity, about the fear of losing everything he had believed in. And in that moment, the reality of the man Ikea was facing became undeniable. On the morning of January 7, 2024, Ikea was getting ready to have the conversation that she had been dreading for weeks. With her 3-week-old daughter, Iselin, asleep in the next room, Ikea had already prepared herself to face the truth, one that had been hanging over her relationship with Trevon for months. She had planned to tell him the truth about the paternity test results. The truth that would reveal that Trevon was not the biological father of her daughter. It was a difficult revelation, one that would change the dynamics of their relationship forever. But Ikea, despite all the complications, was determined to face the truth head-on. She had hoped that, despite the tension between them, Trevon would understand. She had hoped for closure, for some form of resolution. But she didn't know that this day would end in a way she couldn't have possibly imagined. Around 10:30 a.m. Ikea's mother, Takoya Lester, was in the living room when she heard a loud noise coming from Ikea's bedroom. It wasn't the sound of laughter or a typical morning stir, but something jarring, something that immediately caught her attention. A loud bang echoed through the house, followed by silence. Startled, Takoya rose from the couch and walked toward the hallway, her heart beginning to race. She knocked gently on Ikea's door, expecting a simple response, but there was no answer. Her intuition told her something was wrong. Takoya's anxiety deepened as she heard nothing but an eerie stillness from behind the closed door. She knocked harder this time, calling her daughter's name, Ikea. But still there was no response. In a panic, Takoya tried the door handle. Lock. Her fear grew as she struggled with the knob, trying to get in, but the door wouldn't budge. Desperation began to take over. Without thinking, she quickly turned and dashed toward the outside of the house, racing to Ikea's bedroom window. When she reached the window, her eyes widened in disbelief. The window screen had been pushed outward, as if someone had hurriedly escaped through it. With a sinking feeling in her stomach, Takoya knew something was terribly wrong. She slowly opened the window, her breath catching in her throat. What she saw inside the room was nothing short of horrific. There, lying motionless on the floor next to her bed, was Ikea. Her body was still, her eyes open but unseeing. A gunshot wound to her chest was visible, blood slowly pooling beneath her. Takoya's heart stopped. Her worst fears had come true. The daughter she had raised, the vibrant young woman who had been her strength, was gone. In a panic, Takoya climbed through the window, her hands trembling as she reached for her daughter. Her mind raced, desperate for answers that would never come. She tried to shake Ikea awake, calling out her name over and over again. But it was too late. Ikea was gone. The reality of what had happened settled over her like a suffocating weight. Takoya's screams rang out, breaking the silence of the home. In that moment, the life of a loving daughter, a dedicated sister, and a promising young mother had been violently stolen. The police would later confirm that Ikea had died from a single gunshot wound to her chest. But in that instant, the questions began. Questions that would haunt her family for the rest of their lives. Who had done this to Ikea? And why? Why had this bright young woman, full of promise and dreams, had her life taken so abruptly? In the quiet chaos that followed, one thing was painfully clear. Ikea's life had been cut short by violence. Violence that had been waiting to erupt for far too long. Immediately after Takoya's heartbreaking discovery, the Dallas Police Department launched an urgent investigation. The scene was chaotic and heartbreaking. A young woman, full of life and promise, had been taken in an instant. The officers on the ground knew this was no ordinary case. They carefully collected evidence, documenting every detail as they pieced together the tragic puzzle of Ikea's final moments. The room told a story. A gunshot wound to Ikea's chest, the position of her body, the shattered phone, the displaced furniture, all pointed to a violent altercation. It wasn't a random act. Someone had been there, and that someone had taken Ikea's life. At the heart of the investigation was the relationship between Ikea and Trevon Wright. The young couple had been on again, off again for years, and though their bond had been filled with both passion and tension, it wasn't immediately clear how far that tension had escalated. What had begun as a moment of quiet conversation had ended in a shocking act of violence. As investigators dug deeper into the history of the couple, they began to see the troubling patterns of Trevon's behavior. His possessiveness, his anger, his need for control, it all pointed toward a dangerous emotional instability. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment crime. It was the culmination of years of unresolved issues and volatile emotions. It didn't take long for police to focus on Trevon as the primary suspect. Witnesses and neighbors had reported hearing loud noises coming from Ikea's bedroom that morning, though no one had heard the gunshot itself, which was muffled. Despite the locked door and the evidence inside the room, the mystery of what happened remained incomplete. The crucial question was, where was Trevon? 2 days after the murder, on January 9, 2024, the U.S. Marshals Task Force, working in coordination with Dallas Police, launched a search for Trevon Wright. The investigation had already gathered enough evidence to identify him as the prime suspect, and law enforcement was not willing to let him slip away. Hours after his arrest warrant was issued, the task force tracked him down and apprehended him. The arrest took place in a quiet corner of the city, far from the scene of the crime. Trevon was taken into custody without incident. He was booked into the Dallas County Jail on charges of murder. The community, still reeling from the shock of Ikea's death, breathed a collective sigh of relief. At least now they had answers. Or so it seemed. During the trial that followed, Trevon's defense team attempted to claim that the shooting was an accident. He testified that he had been struggling with suicidal thoughts and that, in a moment of emotional turmoil, the gun discharged during a confrontation with Ikea. According to Trevon, he never meant to kill her. It was a tragic accident that spiraled out of control. But the prosecution had a different story to tell. They weren't buying the accidental shooting defense. They painted a different picture. A picture of a young man who had spent years manipulating and controlling the woman he loved. The prosecution presented a history of violence in Trevon's relationships, including violent outbursts, emotional abuse, and gang affiliation that had shaped his worldview. They argued that Trevon's actions on that January morning were not the result of an accident but the culmination of his escalating anger and frustration over Ikea's revelation about the paternity test. Evidence presented in court included text messages from Trevon that revealed an unhealthy fixation on Ikea, as well as his threatening behavior in the days leading up to her death. He had been deeply hurt by the news that he wasn't the father of Iceland, but rather than processing the information maturely, Trevon had allowed his feelings of betrayal to fester into something much darker. The jury, after hearing both sides of the argument and reviewing the evidence, convicted Trevon Wright of first-degree murder. The case was one of domestic violence, betrayal, and tragedy. The emotional toll it had taken on Ikea's family, her friends, and the community was immeasurable. The finality of the conviction didn't bring Ikea back, but it provided a sense of justice. Trevon was sentenced to life in prison. It was a sentence that, for some, felt like a small piece of justice for the life that had been so senselessly taken. But for Ikea's family, it could never be enough. No sentence could bring back the bright, ambitious young woman they had lost. The version of Scene 5 offers a deeper dive into the investigation, explaining how the evidence and Trevon's history led to his arrest and conviction. It shows the emotional and legal aftermath of the crime while also highlighting the dynamics of the case that made it so complex. The focus on the trial and the defense's argument contrasts with the prosecution's case, offering a complete look at the justice process that followed Ikea's tragic death. In January 2025, after months of legal proceedings and emotional testimony, Trevon Wright was convicted of first-degree murder for the killing of Ikea Hood. The trial had been a long and painful journey for Ikea's family, friends, and the community who had been affected by her loss. Yet, in the end, the jury found Trevon guilty, holding him accountable for taking a young life full of potential, full of dreams. The courtroom was quiet as the verdict was read, and for a moment, it felt as though time itself had paused. Ikea's family, though relieved by the conviction, were still left with an overwhelming emptiness. A life full of promise had been ripped away. Her future, her dreams, and the possibilities that lay ahead were now just memories. The court's decision would never replace what they had lost, but it was a step toward justice for the vibrant young woman whose life had been cut short. Trevon, too, sat silently as the verdict was announced. His fate was sealed, life in prison. The jury had deliberated, weighed the evidence, and decided that his actions on that fateful January morning were far beyond the scope of an accident. His history of violence, his emotional instability, and the devastating actions he had taken against Ikea pointed to something far more calculated and dangerous than a tragic moment of despair. His defense, the claim that the shooting was an accident, that it was born out of his own personal struggles with suicidal thoughts, had failed to convince the court. The prosecution had presented a case built on Trevon's history of emotional abuse, manipulation, and the dangerous possessiveness that had characterized his relationship with Ikea. The truth was clear. Ikea was the victim of a violent outburst, not an accident. A woman who had trusted someone she loved had been taken from this world because of his inability to control his emotions and actions. As the gavel came down, Ikea's family remained seated, holding on to one another for support. The sentence of life in prison was a reminder that Trevon's actions would have consequences, but for them, it would never bring Ikea back. There was no sentence that could restore what had been taken from them, what had been taken from Ikea. Ikea's mother, Takoya Lester, who had been a rock throughout the trial, said in an emotional statement to the court, "Ikea was not just my daughter, she was a light in this world. She had dreams, she had a future, and now she's gone. We will miss her forever." Her words echoed throughout the courtroom, a stark reminder of how domestic violence doesn't just affect one person. It destroys entire families, ripples through communities, and leaves an indelible mark on everyone who knew and loved the victim. Though justice had been served in Trevon's conviction, the truth was that nothing could replace the loss of Ikea. Her family would never be the same, and the community, especially those who knew her from her school, her dance team, and her church, would continue to mourn the young woman whose bright future was extinguished far too soon. Ikea's story, though painful, highlighted an issue that too many families face every day: the dangers of unresolved conflict and the potential for violence in abusive relationships. The relationship between Ikea and Trevon had always been marked by ups and downs, by love mixed with jealousy and control. Yet, despite the signs of trouble, many didn't fully understand the dangers that lay beneath the surface. Ikea's death serves as a painful reminder of the importance of addressing domestic violence and providing support for those in vulnerable relationships. Her story is a call to action, a reminder to us all that we must take the time to recognize the red flags, to offer support, and to protect those we love before it's too late. Ikea Hood's story is one of promise lost too soon. Her dreams of dancing on bigger stages, of raising her daughter with love and care, were cut short by a moment of violence. A life that had so much more to give was stolen in the blink of an eye. Yet, despite her tragic end, Ikea's legacy lives on, etched into the hearts of those who knew her, and in the lessons we can all take away from her story. Her love for her daughter, her determination to succeed, and her unwavering spirit were qualities that made Ikea unforgettable. Her death is a painful reminder that none of us can take tomorrow for granted, and we must always be vigilant in recognizing the signs of abusive relationships. As we reflect on her life, we ask, how many more lives can be saved if we recognize the signs of abuse before it escalates? How can we support those who are vulnerable, especially in relationships where manipulation and control can lead to devastating consequences? The answer is simple: by being aware, speaking out, and offering support to those who need it most. Ikea's story doesn't just end in tragedy, it serves as a call to action. It challenges us to look closer, to listen harder, and to never turn a blind eye when we suspect someone may be in danger. If you or someone you know is in an abusive relationship, please seek help. There are resources and people ready to support you. No one should ever feel alone in a situation like this. Thank you for joining us on this journey. If you found Ikea Hood's story touching, if it moved you in any way, we ask that you share it with your friends and family. You might not know who could benefit from hearing her story. And don't forget to subscribe to City Crime Tales for more real-life stories that matter. Together, we can make sure stories like Ikea's lead to real change.